person, but seven, wait, nine. Okay, so.
I'll just hand myself. It's a really small class, so.
Yeah, so, yeah. Could you please bring back the extras, because in the next class we can distribute them.
Oh, okay.
So, let's see. So I know your G and Yeongjun here. And Min. Yunso. Kyunghyun. Who's this? There is that. Shleginova?
It's Marilee, actually.
Shle.
This is my last name.
That's your. Oh, okay. So how do you say your first name?
Marilee.
Marilee. Okay. This is a typical name. I'm sorry. Jablonbek.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
me.
that's your first name.
Yeah.
One. Oh, here you can see. Here, Jeong. Victor, I don't see. Sumin is here. Jongmin. And Huangmin. Ji-Yoon. No, sorry, that's okay. Okay, great. So that's seven. Eight. Yes, okay. Yeah, so attendance all recorded, you're not here in vain. Okay, all right, so now I turn it over to you. Yeah.
Should I just present it from here?
You can stand there if that makes you feel more,
I'll just do it over.
okay.
Here, okay. So it's kind of a small class, so I'll just try to be a bit more casual on
Yes,
the presentation. So hello guys, my name is Seung-Min Shin, and today I'll be presenting about defining the Gamesian solidarity. So the reason I chose this topic first of all is because solidarity, usually when I learned about the solidarity in other classes, especially I'm very interested into the imperialism and colonial studies these days, and I'm studying about that. And those kind of solidarity always entailed the nationalism inside it. But what I realized from the Gamista Plague's solidarity is a bit different to what we usually learn, because in Korea there's a term called 민족. So it is not just the ethnical ethnicity related to ethnicity, but also there were a lot of also the history is all included. However, what the sorry, my pronunciation is quite difficult. Camus is trying to show to us about this idea of solidarity seemed a bit different to our original idea of what the solidarity is. So now I will try my best to define what the Camusian solidarity is. And what I want to say before I begin this presentation is that I prepared for this presentation and then watched the online lecture, and then what I realized was that there were quite similarities, but I will try my best to give my own interpretation into it. So the plague overall, the city of Oran, is more than just a medical crisis. I think it is an impartial human crisis, because it goes to every people, and then a stark realization of the absurdity thanks to the plague. My argument I want to focus on is that the Cambodian solidarity is the only valid response to this absurdity, and the reason I use this word only is because that when I was reading The Stranger, I kind of felt more of a passive action that Camus was trying to show, and I did not feel any kind of active response to the situation and the human existence and the crisis. However, what I find quite intriguing in The Plague is that Camus was trying to give the best answer to it and trying to give a response to the crisis and the absurdity that the humans are facing. And I think it is achieved by shifting our focus from the individual differences to our collective humanity, and it transformed the citizens' passive acceptance to more of a kind of a strong word, but active resistance into it. And I'm going to explain this through two main ideas. And first, it will be how the absurdity created the ethical foundation for the solidarity, and second, how solidarity is then defined through a practical action. When I get to the first idea, I want some critical opinions about whether you guys agree or disagree with the idea of when I said the ethical foundation into it, because the ethics, I try to implement some ethical ideas into it. However, I'm not really sure if that's the right interpretation. I want to hear your opinions about it. So first of all, the main idea one is that equality achieved through absurdity, and it kind of gave an ethical foundation to it. By the plague, it dismantled the old values by the plague, and then the crisis acts as a great equalizer, stripping away the divine justice and individualism to establish a foundation of equal vulnerability. So when we look at the first reference, it is a death without meaning and the shared fate that everyone had to face. So the plague turns individual death into impersonal, mechanical reality, into basically numbers. In the mass burials that we can see in part 3, there's no ceremonial or individual responses. It's just simple numbers of how many people died that day. And then it gets worse by burying everyone at once and not doing any kind of ceremony. So before in part 1 and 2, the Camus was trying to Camus emphasized this like humanistic aspect by just saying the numbers and records. The Camus tried to emphasize it more by explaining the scenes of people dying and people buried without any kind of humanistic recognition. So the shift to numbers, not the names before, is quite crucial, and it tells us that everyone, regardless of the status, is equally vulnerable in their fate. And then the system sacrificed all sentiments for the efficiency, because it highlights that the meaning people constructed was vulnerable at that time. Not just the people itself, but the meaning that people constructed is also vulnerable. But the fact of their shared death was absolute. So when we look at the reference over here, there's a point, as the narrator noted, that in time of plague, such sentiment can't be taken into account, and all was sacrificed to efficiency. And I want everyone to focus on this idea of efficiency over the individualism that we usually take more into account. And then when we look at the second case, it's it's the death of the innocent child, and the second sermon by the Father Panelu. And the ultimate catalyst for solidarity is the prolonged, agonizing death of the innocent child, and this suffering is meaningless and undeserved, and it shattered any remaining belief in a just divine order that the people of Oran used to believe. And this was not just the death, but also the sermon adds on to it. The changes in the sermon adds on to it, and this clearly shows that the divine order is not something that it may be just more of a constructed by humans, and then the human's existence should come first, and then the divine order might exist or not, but that does not matter to Camus, I think, in my opinion. And this event forces the Father Panelu into more of a profound theological crisis, I think, and then he started to use the idea of we. instead of you. And this change of pronoun, I think, gives quite significant meaning. That and it gives a slight glimpse of solidarity while talking about absurdity. So I want everyone to focus on this idea of the changes in the pronoun. And this transition signals a move away from seeking a divine explanation toward a secular humanism and shared humanity. And then, as I said before, a glimpse of solidarity appears. And then it's kind of a strong argument, but maybe I think Camus was trying to collapse the divine order. However, what Professor mentioned before in the online lecture was that he did not deny on the existence of God, actually. So I'm not trying to say that Camus was trying to criticize God or anything, but it's just that he's trying to make meaningless what used to be quite meaningful, and that I think we should not go upon that. And I will go on to the second main idea, which is the practical essence of solidarity that was found mainly in part 4, and it was, I think, more of a revolt through common decency. I know that the word revolt is quite a strong word, but I want to focus that. I personally thought more of it as a revolt. Solidarity isn't just a feeling, I think, anymore. It's not just a simple concept. However, it is a practical action. And Camus, considering that Camus focused on the existence instead of God or divine order, I think it kind of has a similarities into it by saying, trying to show the practicality inside the solidarity. And the choices of the main characters define it as revolt against the absurdity rather than just a simple adaptation to the crisis. So total 2 instances can be shown. The first is the Humbel's choice to say. Humbel, as you guys all know, is a journalist and who was desperate to escape for his lover, but rather makes a voluntary ethical choice to remain at the very last moment. And he rejects the justification of individual happiness. And he realizes that personal happiness cannot be justified when it means abandoning the collective struggle. And this showcases Camus' view of heroism, not divine revelation or grand gestures, but just diligently doing what they have to do in front of them. And then this was clearly shown from the reference where it says that the business is everybody's business, and he also said that it may be shameful to be happy by oneself, and this clearly shows that the idea of solidarity and then the community appeared in the play. And then when we move on to talk between the Tahu and Dr. Hugh, and it showed the ethic of common decency. And what I want to I found this part quite interesting because before getting deeper into about the talk, what I want to point it out was that I found it quite interesting because it also had the swimming in the ocean scene, which was shown in The Stranger, and I thought that Camus would have some kind of intention to it and would have some meanings of the swimming in the ocean, and I want to talk about that later with you guys. So this Dr. Hugh and Tahu's talk was a pivotal conversation, and this solidified the ethical framework of this struggle. Their intellectual and emotional solidarity is rooted in something modest and profoundly human, and this was clearly shown in being a man, not being some kind of a divine creature or being a saint or something like that. They agree that the fight doesn't rely on God or heroism, and what interests Tahu is simply being a man, and this commitment is called a common decency. And by focusing on this, they actively create a human value in a meaningless world that the plague has formed. And then this sustained conscious action against absurdity, and I think it's the core definition of revolt. And what I want to emphasize is that the heroism, this reference says that the heroism and sanctity don't really appeal to me, I imagine. What interests me is being a man. When I first read this part, what I thought was quite interesting, because when we usually think about it, being a saint is much better than just being a man. However, Camus has tried to break this common sense and said that being a man is more heroic than being a saint. And I want you guys to take a deeper look on that and have a deeper to think deeper about this part. And then the discussion questions too that I want to give it to you guys for today is that the first one is, why do you think Camus continuously uses swimming in the ocean as a tool to show pure and intimate relationship as in a stranger? What about the execution part? And adding on, what I want to talk more about is the execution which Tarou used in his talk. And then execution also appeared in The Stranger. So I want to talk about the meanings of the swimming in the ocean and also the meaning of the execution and why Camus was trying to using this. Why can we use this in his story? And then the second question that I want to ask you is that the Hangbell's decision to stay is an act of choice, while Dr. Hugh's continuous fight is a matter of necessity, because the crisis appeared in front of him and he just acted upon it, but it was not idea of choice. So both of these actions are commitment. However, what type of commitment do you think is better, and it better illustrates the core definition of Camusian solidarity is what I want to talk about with you guys. And thank you for listening to me.
Okay. Comments, questions for someone?
Can I ask this question?
Yeah.
So like, I'm just a bit confused. So like up here, the first main idea you say that, let's say death becomes repetitive and that all who died, I'm guessing, are treated equal and people are equally vulnerable in their fate. But then at the same time, in the part below that, you say that the death of the innocent child was the ultimate catalyst for the shift toward solidarity. So every single other death is treated equal, but this one is special for some reason.
Oh, yeah, I understand what you're confused. What I was trying to say was that it was more of the second death. The death of an innocent child was more of like author's intention, because intention to show some catalytic shift of it. However, it does not mean that the child's death is like something more important or anything, but it was just that the death of a child was found to be a catalytic shift of it. And I was not trying to make a different approach to it.
Yeah, but I guess one can still extend that question a little bit. But why? How is it possible for Camus to use that particular death as a catalyst, as you're saying? What makes that death usable in that way?
I think okay, I was trying to think about it, but
Yeah, would anyone like to try answering that question? Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I'm not very sure, but I think it might be kind of related to the ideology of the Father Penelope, and like how he connects that people's deaths are kind of connected to the actual, it's basically consequences of their previous actions, or like to be more precise, their sins. And when we're showing that a child is dying in painful, agonizing way, there is no explanation to it, which kind of triggers people to think that maybe something, as he said, like the meaning is constructed and now it's like very vulnerable. And it's basically, the child's death is basically hitting onto the foundation of that thoughts that were, and whenever the situation is explainable by people, when we have explanation for something, I think we're less scared of it,
Right.
And for some moment, the religious reasons might be for some people the explanation for the situation. But when then we have no idea of what's happening, we are more scared of the unknown naturally. And when the child died, the hypothesis that it's caused by actions of people, the death is consequence of the actions, was denied. And now people are kind of in darkness, like their beliefs are lost. And Father Penelo also started doubting his own belief at some moment, but he stuck to it till the end.
Exactly. Yeah. Good. Yeah. I will say I'm kind of saving because I think Shua, are you going to make a presentation?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So that's why I'm not going to say too much about it. But that was a great answer. Was there a hand? No. Okay. Yeah. But then to go on to any other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Can I answer the question?
Yeah.
So about the second question, I do believe that Rambert's decisions to stay was the better definition of the Communist solidarity. According to the thesis, to the definition that is given here, it is a response to the impartial human crisis, which is absurdity caused by the plague. The solidarity is achieved by shifting focus from individual differences to collective humanity, which exactly happened to the Rambert when he decided that his personal happiness cannot overweight the collective responsibility.
Right. It is definitely an act of solidarity. Yes. So the question here is, in a way, you're kind of giving us an occasion to think about the difference between choice and necessity. So you are saying that Ryu is actually doing what is necessary. His actions are out of necessity, but Humbert, he actually, it looks like, at least on the surface, he makes that particular decision. He makes a choice to stay. So there we can kind of say that, okay, one person's action represents choice, the other person, represents necessity. But we can actually play with these words to see whether that distinction between choice and necessity actually works in this narrative. You see what I'm trying to say? Because it sounds to us in our regular understanding of the words, they seem opposed to each other. But in this text, we actually see how they come very close to each other, almost to a point where they're indistinguishable. Or the plague is a kind of event that gives you only one choice, which is necessity. Right? So many things we take for granted in our reality are based on how we use language. So that goes with our larger theme of the course, the body versus language and all that. Language is that powerful. It can actually really determine how you relate to reality. But here, my one question for Sungmin is, can you tell us more about how execution appears in this story? How does Tahu present this topic, execution?
So when he was talking about his life and overall the situation that he had to face, he was talking about the people who were executed, and he said he would be more on the side of, I'm not really sure the exact word, but I think it was defeated or something.
Like victims,
Excuse me?
Victims, maybe?
Victims, I think, yeah, victims. And I couldn't find the answer to it. However, maybe this idea of execution and then all victims are being equally treated in front of an execution was trying to again show that the impartial fate that every people had to face in front of the execution. And the reason I'm trying to connect this with the stranger was that at the stranger we also see there's also talk about death and about the execution and guillotines, and I think there is some kind of a similarities I think there must be a reason why Camus was trying to use this idea of execution not just in the stranger but also in the plate. But I was keep thinking about it, but not sure. But maybe it had similar rules, or maybe it had different rules, and I wanted to hear some opinions about it.
Any thoughts?
I was thinking maybe here they're also like going against idea of the certain deaths, like guillotine, like it guarantees that someone will die, and here they're once again, like sentencing someone to a very certain death. That I think Camus was like totally against that idea of certain deaths, and he would much rather prefer something similar to plague, which is like, which gives you a chance
Yes,
maybe to
yes.
survive.
Yes,
Maybe it's
yes.
once in a million or like very small, but still there is a chance.
Yeah, right. So what, Sungmin, what you were getting at about like how, in a way, you said something like everybody is equal before execution, something like that? That's a little bit different from, I think, what we've been developing, because it's not, execution is, it doesn't make people equal. It's actually the way in which some people decide that they're in a position to determine whether someone's gonna live or die.
Oh.
It's completely unequal, right? So the word that he uses, or the figure that he uses in order to capture a certain kind of existential equality is actually exile. Exile. He says we are all exiles. We are exiled from our own existence in a way, or our existence is what renders all of us exiles, because we do not have, this claim over our, existence, but that doesn't mean we don't have any freedom. Within that exiled situation, you can fashion out certain forms of freedom, but to begin with, to be thrown into the world in this absurd, contingent birth into the world, in that regard, we are all exiles. We begin our lives as exiles. So that's closer to what you were getting at, I think.
Thank you. I was
Okay.
actually confused while I was reading it. I was
Yeah.
trying to find the meaning, but it was getting
More and more, because we are so alone with our things. But this is what we are seeing here. The death now is experienced in an entirely different way, not just for the theological reason, but because it's experienced. They're there. The team is there with this little boy. That's why it becomes a turning point, especially for someone like Panelu, because he thought he had an explanation, and now there's no explanation, and he's very much touched by the whole thing. So after the boy's death, he has a brief kind of encounter with Ryu, and they have a conversation, and they kind of get angry at each other. I don't know if you noticed that. What's the point of that strange encounter? Why are they kind of hostile to each other when they're on the same team?
I think there was similar conversation like after the first ceremony, where Ryu says, "You wouldn't think the way that you are thinking if you were to see all the deaths that I have seen." And after that, I think Father Penelo might have been encouraged to join the team. And after which he experienced the actual death. And just like as Ryu said, his perception kind of changed, but at the moment Ryu might have thought he still thinks that the child's death is still God's punishment.
Yes. So he wouldn't say that it's God's punishment, but he now just changes the words a little bit. Now, what the point is that how can we know God's intention? We do not know. It's before it was God's intention to punish us, to bring us back. But now his point is God's intention is unknowable. It's a mystery. So he's still attributed to God, but before it was God's intention that we can know, but now simply that it's still God's intention, but we can never know. That's all. Yes.
I have
about your previous point that you made about observing this situation collectively, like in groups. Does that make people, individuals, think that the situation is more serious or less serious than?
Oh, definitely more, but it's not so much serious, but you're really touched by the event. So, to use your word, yes, more serious, but it's not so much serious. It's something that goes beyond kind of any kind of calculation. It's just you're kind of overwhelmed by the event.
So
And-
it intensifies the emotions. So does it intensify the emotions that it is?
Yeah, but emotions not in the sense that we experienced in the stranger, where emotions are not the best indication of our experience. It's not so much emotions. It's that feeling of your entire being touched by the event. So I think that strange encounter between Ryu and Panelu is really because Panelu says what? We should love everything that we don't understand, or something of that sort. Yeah, he says on 218. So Panelu says that sort of thing is revolting because it passes our human understanding. But perhaps we should love what we cannot understand. Ryu straightened up slowly. He gazed at Panelu, summoning to his gaze all the strength and fervor he could muster against his weariness. Then he shook his head. No, father, I have a very different idea of love. And until my dying day, I shall refuse to love a scheme of things in which children are put to torture. But then Panelu goes one step further. He says, oh, doctor, I've just realized what is meant by grace. So he's now saying that the boy's death can still be understood as a form of God's grace. Except that it surpasses our human understanding, so it looks on the surface like completely unreasonable, but that's precisely what grace means. It's beyond our human understanding. So this goes to give him the content of his second sermon, where he says all or nothing. You must believe all or nothing. But none of us have enough courage to deny everything, therefore we should believe everything. Now, just for the fun of it, I would like to know what you think of that sermon, if that made any sense to you.
I personally thought that the sermon that Father Panelu was giving was not understandable to me personally, because first of all, he just clearly stated it out, just simply said that we cannot deny everything. And I thought that if we can believe in everything, why not we cannot believe in anything? That was the first question, because he just made assumption that we cannot deny on anything, but it also requires the courage to believe on everything and just follow what God has said. And I thought that first that was quite weird, and I kind of thought that there was a theological crisis. This sermon actually showed the crisis that the Father Panelu was facing, because the logical structure that he had was, in my personal opinion, quite weak compared to the first sermon. And then this seemed to show that even though that the Father Panelu was still trying his best to follow his faith, we can see a glimpse of his crisis inside.
But then, let me just turn I don't want people to feel sleepy, so I'll turn this on. But then what would you say about this little boy's death? What can you say as a priest?
have had some difficulties explaining that.
Yes.
So he failed, basically.
I mean, but then what is God, everyone? I don't know if you are believers, but I mean, you don't have to be a believer to participate in this discussion. Think about it. What is God? God is not human. So if you say you believe in God, you're actually saying that things that God does, I wouldn't be able to calculate. Because God is not human. God is not some grandpa with, with magnifying glass. He's not. Or it is not, or whatever. So, therefore, theologically, his point is correct. It's just that people cannot take it. And you're going to see what people do because they cannot take it when we get to The Grand Inquisitor by Dostoevsky. When we get to this story, you'll see people cannot take this truth. Because by saying that he is God, you are actually saying that he is off all the charts that I use in order to understand humanity, because God is not human. For God, death should be just coming and going. It's not like, God doesn't disappear. Therefore, if a child dies, maybe the child will come to God. So for him, it's not a tragedy. It's just a simple example, right? So, in other words, if the plague is an absurd event, which it is according to the text, absurd is by definition, we said what? It's something that you cannot evaluate in, why did this happen? We have no reason that we can give for it. Of course, we can call the germ, and this is the germ that, yeah, but that doesn't explain why it happened today, here, why now? We have no answers to these questions. So the contingency of the event remains. No matter what the science says, it is still contingent. Now, with the earlier sermon, what he was saying is that we have a very definite explanation. It's that it's a punishment. Now that everybody can understand it, but people who feel that they're sinful would kind of try to reject it. Oh, I'm not a believer, so it doesn't really matter. It's easy to refute that. But with the second sermon, the argument there is much harder. Because it's saying that you should accept anything and everything as coming from God. Because we do not know God's intentions. We do not know what God sees. So, but then still, by saying that it is God's intention, although we do not know what it is, it's still God's intention. He's still able to give some kind of meaning to this absurd event. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So God is the explanation. So it's no longer absurd. It's unknowable, but it's still not absurd. Yes?
I just have a question. I mean, personally, I would be on the place of people of Iran, and I was listening to the second sermon where the Father Final was telling us that we should accept everything that God gives us. That would make me non-religious, honestly, because if the God gives me a child who's dying in agony, I don't want to accept that.
Right.
I don't want to accept this from a God. So why would people still be religious and put all their faith into God after the second sermon and after the death of the child? How would that give them faith and believe in the better future?
So, then what's the alternative?
Don't believe in God.
Yeah, don't believe in God. So either you decide not to believe in God, or you continue to believe in God, but that division has always been there, right? It's not like the plague is going to change that, although if anything, more people will become believers because of the plague. Because it's a contingent, they always want some kind of explanations, right? So with what the Father is doing is that we may not know it, but there is a reason, which is a way of kind of still domesticating the contingent event.
What I really respect about Father Penelo is in real life, most of the times, when religious people, when they're like religious beliefs are put into the question, like even if they're not sure, I have rarely or never seen someone actually accept it, just like Father Panelu is.
Yes,
And I think it's actually like, it would convince me, like actually, like instead of giving some half-assed reason to say, oh, actually it's this and that actually doesn't make sense, but like make up some story, because I have seen like the examples of this like in real life, and I didn't really appreciate it. But in that case, I think it makes perfect sense, because like Father Panelu is not the God himself, so he cannot give me the reason why that's happening. But if he was a God, he would give me a reason. So I would what I would think is that there is a reason, as you said, but like Father Panelu is not the person who is able to explain that to me. Maybe there is someone out there, or maybe there is no one. But still, like I would really appreciate him for accepting that he doesn't have logical explanation for the situation, instead of making something up, which would happen most of the times in real life.
Yeah. So that's why when he's giving his sermon, Yu is in the audience, and he's thinking, oh no, he's taking a risk here, because he's going to say something that believers will not approve. So you see, but then if he just does that, it's just like, okay, so he says something scandalous. It's almost heretical thing he just said. But then when he got sick, he really wants to live that new knowledge by refusing to see a doctor. He wants to just leave it to God to determine his fate. So there's something very touching about that decision. You know, I want God to be the only doctor. I don't want any human beings to meddle with my fate. It's all in God's hands. That's all great. But of course, what he doesn't understand is that even if he were to call a doctor, if God wants him die, he will make him die. Do you see what I'm trying to say? In a way, he's so kind of naive in a very lovable way, if that makes sense. He's so naive. He thinks, God against doctors. No. If God is really the kind of God that he thinks he is, then he can do anything with the doctors. The doctors can make a mistake and he can still die.
I'm sorry, does it make him like any different than people who he described previously, like Abyssian people or something?
Right.
Like who would make themselves
Yes, yes.
sick on purpose just
Yes.
to die and be closer to God?
Yeah, exactly. But what they were doing is not to. It was a certain kind of real sense of martyrdom. Like I'm testing my asceticism. I'm testing the limits of my body. But with him, it's just waiting to see what God's going to do. Because it's a completely different situation. That Abyssian example is like people are all evacuating, to run away from, the plague, and then he alone stays, in the monastery waiting for whatever. Or other examples, there are multiple examples of people who were, if you read about these medieval mystics, they would wash lepers, and then they drink the water. They did all kinds of things. It's not to test God, but it's to really push the limits of their own humanity. It is their way of getting close to God. But in his case, because it's modernity, you can't really do the kind of thing that monk was doing. All he does is to sit there and wait to see what's going to happen. It's almost, one can even accuse him of testing God.
Sorry, I meant like the people who were making themselves sick on purpose.
Yeah.
But you were talking about monk, right? Or
So they are both examples of
so
how
it's
to
the same.
deal.
Okay.
Yes, how to deal with this kind of situation. Yeah, religious people. Yeah.
I'm not a believer, but I've heard from some people that do not test the God is
Yeah,
kind of a norm.
Right.
Not religious.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if he got killed by the God because he wanted to test him. And I also want to hear from other students if they believe Father Penelopes belief was kind of weakened after the second sermon, because obviously I searched on internet if the second sermon kind of represented uncertainty about the God's omnipotence, or was it just a pure representation of complete belief in God? Because Father Penelope definitely died with the contingency, like his cause of the death was
Doubtful case.
it was a doubtful case. So I was kind of wondering if he was a complete representation of the complete belief in God, or was it just a kind of a weakened belief in God's omnipotence?
I honestly think that after the death of a child, he started questioning his own belief and faith in God. Of course, probably even the priest under circumstances like this would probably question it, because he was so sure that it's a punishment from a God for our sins. But now that a child who's not sinned once in his life is dead, and of course it was a punishment from a God even though he didn't have any sins, he started to question his belief. And I think at some point he was just, I feel like it's just his character who's very stubborn. He just wants to make his faith, he wants to prove that his faith is worth, and that his words are real. And I think that even though he did question his belief in God, he didn't ask for a doctor, because I honestly think because he was stubborn and he wanted to die with the thought that his ideas and his faith in God was right.
So, so was he faithful at his first sermon? Is this a faithful man according to your understanding?
Yeah, I think he is faithful, but it's not only about faith. It's also about his own personal opinion. Not his own personal opinion, but more of I want to die on the hill that the God is, that I believe in God and the God is doing this and that.
Yeah, but then do you really believe that a faithful man would speak for God that way? To say that this is God's punishment, how does he know he's just a man?
I feel like in the beginning he wasn't necessarily a faithful individual, but he was rather like someone doing his job.
Yeah,
Just
he's
like
a good priest.
yeah,
That's
just
exactly
like,
what it, yeah. He's a good priest. That doesn't make him a faithful man. And does it, Jean, you use the word, like complete belief. In a way, when your faith is as complete as it can be, you should be doubting. Because complete faith is impossible for human. It's not. If we can have complete faith, we would be God. So this takes us back to the earlier idea of human subject internally divided. You're never one. You're never one unified agency. When you have one thought, there's some other thought that's already disturbing that one thought. You're never one person in your mind. In that sense, complete faith is impossible. I'm speaking from the existentialist kind of perspective. I'm not trying to insult any believers here. But from the existentialist context, the real belief is that we are incapable of having. So in a way, when he begins to actually doubt, his faith is actually starting. When he had no doubts, he wasn't really believing. He was doing his job. And it's precisely when he begins to have doubts, he has to deal with these doubts. That's when his life as a believing man really starts.
I kind of realized that his belief kind of alleviated after the second sermon.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I thought it was kind of cunning to make the God as the explanations.
Yes, yeah. But so in a way, but you can't get it right the first try. But he's only having his first try because earlier it wasn't even a try. It was so simple to say that he's basically in his first sermon. He's like the chaplain in The Stranger. I know exactly what you're going through. After your death, another world is waiting for you. He's speaking as if he's already, died and come back to life. He speaks as if he knows everything God knows. He doesn't. He's just a man. So here he is confronting his humanity as a man who's supposed to believe. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So a faithful man would be a man who is constantly struggling with his doubts. That's how you can actually verify that there is faith here. It's a mystery. Faith is a mystery.
So he didn't believe at first. He was just doing his job, is what you said? During the first sermon, right?
We can put it that way, yes.
Okay, and then when he started doubting, that's when his life as a believing person started? But then when he died, did he die as a faithful and believing person?
As a man who's struggling with his faith. Yeah, struggling with his faith. That's why the final conclusion on his illness is a doubtful case, which has a double meaning there. It's not just that his actual cause of death is doubtful, but it's also he dies of doubts. One can say. That's where it's a kind of literary play there with that most part.
This is just meaningful, but doubting is such a painful behavior. Then how existential is think about the pain? Is it just the thing we have to accept, or just
Yeah, because whether we accept it or not, it's there. Pain doesn't disappear. Just because you don't accept it, you don't have no pain. It's always there. So it's a question of determining your attitude towards it. You've never met a person who has a painless life. Right? This is why it's so funny. People seem to be very afraid of saying that I accept pain, as if that's going to bring them pain, as if they didn't have pain in the first place. That's I guess it's a human psychology.
so we can change just our attitude toward pain, or
Yeah, because when you position yourself in relation to pain, you can actually find a certain kind of new freedom. But some people are just fine, just running away, defending themselves against pain. So that's another method. So some people would run away and live defensively forever. This is the majority type. People live defensively. Just try to avoid anything, which means they also do not ever become adventurous, which means they never understand the joy of the things beyond the regular, ordinary life. So it's give and take. It's pretty much fair. You take risks and you experience enormous enjoyment, but you have to take risks, which means you may die doing it. Or you live defensively, so you always just run away from pains and do nothing that would be risky. So your life will be safer, but that doesn't mean you're safe from the contingency of life. So we all fashion our own kind of methods. That's what people do.
I have one question, kind of interesting point I want to point out. I found the irony because he was being doubtful in order to believe in his faith, but at the same time, in his second sermon, he says to believe in everything. So, can this irony be regarded as absurdity, another absurdity?
Yeah, but when he says we have to believe everything means, in other words, I have to accept the fact that I'll never know. That's what he means. I'll never know. So that's where his faith and absurdism meet, right? Because he's saying, I have to accept that I'll never know, which means I'll never know means what? There's no foundational meaning, which takes us right to the absurd.
I think I want to connect Sua's point because we were discussing how were they facing with the plague, but I want to connect to the broader theme of the absurd. So here the author is trying to contrast the two characters. So the Father Panelist's response to the absurd is basically not revolting. He was completely surrendering to the plague, while Rios took a completely different approach.
Right.
He revolted, he took actions, he helped other people, he was fighting against the plague, which was actually the absurd and the contingency.
Right, yeah. But in his small way, one can say, Panelu has kind of begun to revolt a little bit. He puts his body kind of at risk, and he wants to. But of course, it's a very naive form of a revolt. But it is still, at least, he's kind of broken out of that earlier moralism, which is so safe. Moralism always safe. You know, it's like good and evil. I'm on the part of the good, so I can just judge people. Right? So he has broken out of that. So one can say that there was this kind of a new step of revolt there in that action.
But does Dr. Ryu even consider this situation to be absurd in the first place?
You mean Panelu's situation?
No, like this entire plague situation. Is this?
No, so that's the thing. It's not that the people actually think in these terms. So the whole idea of absurd, contingent, blah, 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 these are our existentialist language that we are using in order to understand the characters' behaviors. But the characters themselves are not thinking in those words.
But I think when Father Panelu goes through the events of the child's death and all that, I think he begins to think about all of these events in those kinds of terms.
He says it's unknowable. God's intention is unknowable, which is what we are calling absurd. But then absurd, the whole concept of the absurd comes from this kind of emphatically secular, philosophical understanding of human existence. I don't think he would quite share that. So what he thinks are definitely within the scope of what existentialist thinking would, allow for. But he would never think that he's a philosopher or he's a. I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but he may not think, even if he were to use the word absurd, he wouldn't mean the same thing as what the philosophers would mean by that, what Camus would mean by that. But of course, there are overlaps between the existential meaning of absurd and Panelu's understanding of God's unknowable intention. Yeah. But in any case, the part where they really overlap is the absence of a foundational meaning. In other words, we cannot explain why we are here. Yeah. Okay, so yeah. You have a question? Yeah.
One last question,
Yeah.
because the progress of changing his faith is quite painful, as I mentioned. So I thought he rejects some medication, right?
Right.
So I thought Panelu's want to replace the mental pain with some physical pain, because he, as you said, he feels the absence of his meaning. So I thought.
Yeah, perhaps. I think that's valid. In a way, I'm sorry. This reminds me of Chris Rock after getting slapped on his face. People were, he says what people say. Words hurt. I said those people haven't been slapped. So yes, words hurt. But the way the body hurts is there's something extremely inimitable about the body hurting. So in that sense, yes, Sua, what you're saying is there is a certain kind of, he's like giving up his body to pain. Yeah. Okay, so we'll continue.